November 22, 1944. Forward Headquarters, Reims, France. General Dwight D. Eisenhower sits behind his desk, studying supply distribution reports for the coming winter campaign. The coffee beside him has gone cold. Outside, rain lashes against the windows in steady sheets, the kind of raw November weather that can halt entire armies. Eisenhower signs another requisition form, his thoughts already calculating fuel allotments for December. Then the door opens without a knock. Captain Harry Butcher steps inside. Butcher never enters unannounced unless something is seriously wrong. Eisenhower looks up. His aide's face gives nothing away. "General," Butcher says, "Third Army is reporting from Metz. Fort Grissom surrendered this morning." Eisenhower's pen stops mid-stroke. He places it carefully on the desk and studies Butcher for a long moment. That's impossible. He reaches for the calendar, flipping back through the pages. November 8th. That's when Patton began the assault on Metz. Eisenhower counts silently. 10 days. Just 10. He pulls open a drawer and removes a thick folder stamped classified, British Joint Intelligence Committee. The title page reads, Assessment of Fortress Metz, dated October 18, 1944. He opens it to the executive summary and reads aloud. Fortress Metz represents the most formidable defensive position between the Rhine and Paris. Recommend bypass strategy. Direct assault estimated 180-day operation. Projected casualties 45 to 55,000. Requires minimum 8 divisions with full air support. He looks up at Butcher. British intelligence said 6 months. Patton's been at it 10 days. If you enjoyed this opening and want to hear the full story of how Patton shattered every expert prediction, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for WW2 Elite. We bring you the untold stories of World War II that textbooks leave out. Now let's find out what happened when Eisenhower realized just how impossible Patton's victory really was. Lieutenant General Walter Bedell Smith, Eisenhower's chief of staff, enters carrying a thin folder. Third Army After Action Report. He says, placing on the desk. I confirmed it with G2. Every major fort in the Metz complex has surrendered or been captured. The city is ours. Eisenhower opens a folder and scans the first page. Third Army XX Corps Metz secured. Duration, November 8 through 20 to 22 November. Casualties, 2,897. Forts Grissom Jeanne d'Arc and all satellite positions neutralize. He reads the numbers again, then picks up the British assessment and flips back and forth between the two documents. Walk me through this again. Eisenhower says, the British sent a 47-page analysis explaining why Metz was impregnable without a months-long siege. Yes, sir, Smith replies evenly. Dated October 18th, Joint Intelligence Committee. Their best analysts. Eisenhower traces a finger along the map, following the Moselle River to Metz. Patton took it in 10 days, through rain and mud in November. Smith's voice remains calm. Apparently so, sir. Third Army units are already moving east toward the Saar. Eisenhower does the math in his head. British intelligence said 180 days. Patton took 10. That's 18 times faster than predicted, with 95% fewer casualties. He sets both folders down. That's impossible. Smith allows himself the faintest smile. Apparently not, sir. Eisenhower stands and walks to the window, watching the rain fall. 28 interconnected forts. Concentric defensive rings. Concrete walls 10 feet thick. Fort Grissom alone had underground tunnels linking multiple strong points, artillery capable of striking targets 15 miles away. The Germans built Metz between 1870 and 1916, designing it to be unconquerable, and Patton took it in 10 days. But there's something Eisenhower doesn't know yet. Patton didn't just capture Metz faster than anyone thought possible. He did it using tactics that violated nearly every principle of classical siege warfare. And when Eisenhower learns how, he'll have even more to say. November 22, 1944. 11:47 a.m. Eisenhower picks up the telephone on his desk and instructs the operator to connect him with 3rd Army headquarters in Nancy, France. The line clicks, rings twice. 3rd Army headquarters, General Patton's office. This is General Eisenhower. Put Patton on. Another click, then that familiar voice, confident, almost cheerful. Ike, I was wondering when I'd hear from you. Eisenhower keeps his tone neutral, professional. George, congratulations are in order. Metz in 10 days is remarkable. Now tell me how you did it. Patton answers without hesitation. Ike, you know I don't like to brag, but since you asked, speed, aggression, and a healthy disregard for British intelligence estimates. Eisenhower lifts the British report from his desk. George, I'm reading their assessment right now. 28 interconnected forts, 10-foot concrete walls. This wasn't supposed to be possible without a prolonged siege. You were ordered to contain Metz, not assault it directly. Patton's voice sharpens, taking on the edge Eisenhower knows well. The tone that means Patton is about to explain why everyone else is wrong. The same assessment said the Germans had 15,000 well-supplied defenders. They had maybe 9,000, half-starved, with ammunition shortages. Intelligence is often just educated guessing, Ike. Eisenhower flips pages. You bypass standard siege protocols. You didn't isolate each fort. You didn't wait for heavy artillery positioning. Doctrine says you establish siege lines, cut supply routes, then reduce strong points one by one over weeks. The doctrine was written by men who never had to take Metz in November, with limited supplies and a ticking clock before winter shuts down offensive operations. I hit them everywhere at once. They didn't know where to concentrate their defense. Eisenhower leans back. You risked encirclement. If they counterattacked while you were spread across multiple assault points, if they coordinated a breakout from the interior forts while you were engaged on the perimeter. But they didn't. Patton cuts in because I didn't give them time to organize one. Ike, you can strangle a fortress slowly, methodically by the book, or you can hit it so hard and so fast it doesn't have time to fight back. I chose speed. There's a pause. Then Eisenhower speaks quietly. George, you understand that if this had gone wrong, if you got an entire corps pinned down in November mud outside, Metz with winter coming, you'd have my resignation on your desk. And I deserve it. Another pause. But it didn't go wrong, Patton replies. It worked. We're across the Moselle. Metz is ours. And I'm already positioning for the Saar crossing. The line goes silent. Eisenhower rubs his temple. One of these days, George, your confidence is going to write a check your army can't cash. Patton's reply is instant. Not today, though. Anything else, Ike? Eisenhower chooses his words carefully. Just this, George. Every time you pull off something impossible, it raises expectations for the next impossible thing. There are limits. Patton's voice is calm, certain. Not for 3rd Army. There aren't. Eisenhower hangs up without another word. He leans back in his chair, stares at the map on the wall, and says to no one in particular, he actually did it. Smith is still in the office. Sir, there's something else. Our liaison officer saw Patton's diary entry from this morning. He reads aloud. I called to congratulate me on Metz. I could tell he was equal parts impressed and annoyed. Good. End quote. Eisenhower shakes his head slowly. Of course he wrote that. Smith places another folder on the desk. Sir, we're already receiving inquiries from other commands. Questions about resource allocation. Questions about why their objectives are taking longer than Patton's. And this is where Eisenhower's problems with Patton's impossible victory are only beginning, because when word reaches London and then Berlin about what happened at Metz, it triggers a chain reaction no one saw coming. November 23rd, 1944. London. The British Joint Intelligence Committee receives a formal inquiry from SHEF. The message is brief. Please review Metz assessment dated October 18th in light of Third Army achieving capture in 10 days with under 3,000 casualties. Brigadier Kenneth Strong, senior intelligence analyst, pulls the file and spreads the maps and reports across his desk. The original assessment had been thorough, grounded in German defensive doctrine, historical siege data from World War I when Metz held out for months, current reconnaissance showing massive fortifications, and interviews with the French resistance about German garrison strength. Strong rereads the conclusion. Impregnable without sustained siege. Minimum 6 months. Minimum 8 divisions. Expected casualties exceeding 50,000. He then picks up Third Army's after-action report and scans the details. Assault initiated November 8th. All 28 forts captured or neutralized by November 22nd. 2 divisions. Under 3,000 casualties. Strong sets the report down, takes up his pen, and begins drafting his response. The assessment, he writes, assumed conventional siege tactics, establishment of siege lines, systematic reduction of strong points, coordination of heavy artillery, and air support over an extended time frame. General Patton employed unconventional methods, conducting simultaneous assaults on multiple fortified positions and maintaining continuous offensive pressure 24 hours a day despite adverse weather. The psychological impact of sustained aggression appears to have exceeded the physical defensive capacity of the garrison. Revision of future fortification estimates recommended. Assessment methodology under review. Strong signs a document and sends it through channels, fully aware of what it really means. British intelligence didn't account for Patton being Patton. November 24th, 1944. SAF headquarters. Eisenhower sits in a conference room with his staff. The fall of Metz has created an unexpected problem. If Patton can take an impregnable fortress in 10 days, what other impossible objectives might actually be achievable? And if they are achievable, why aren't other commanders achieving them? The questions are coming from every direction. A message arrives from British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, 21st Army Group. Eisenhower reads it aloud. If Patton required only 10 days from Metz, perhaps Third Army requires fewer supplies than currently allocated. Recommend redistribution to 21st Army Group for Northern Thrust. Smith shakes his head. Sir, if we reduce Patton's supplies because of his success, we're punishing him for being effective. Eisenhower picks up a pen and begins drafting his reply. Metz fell because Patton had adequate supplies and used them aggressively, not recommending we test whether fortresses fall with inadequate supplies. Even as he writes, Eisenhower knows the damage is done. Patton's success has created a political nightmare. Every Allied commander now has to explain why their objectives aren't being achieved as quickly. None of them have Patton's answer, because Patton's answer is simply be Patton, and that isn't transferable, isn't teachable, isn't doctrine. While Allied commanders argue over supply allocations, Patton is already preparing for his next objective. And this one will be even more shocking, because Patton doesn't see Metz as an endpoint. He sees it as momentum. November 25th, 1944. German High Command. Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, East Prussia. A report marked urgent lands on the desk of General Alfred Jodl, Chief of the Operations Staff. He reads the first line. Fortress Metz has fallen. He stops and reads again. Metz was supposed to anchor the West Wall defenses for the winter. Metz was supposed to buy time for reinforcing the Siegfried Line. Metz was supposed to be unconquerable. Jodl walks down the corridor to the briefing room, where Hitler is reviewing maps of the Eastern Front. Jodl enters and presents a report. My Führer, we received confirmation from Army Group G. Metz has fallen to the American Third Army. Hitler looks up from the map, his eyes narrowing. How long did they hold? Jodl hesitates. 10 days, my Führer. Hitler slams his hand down. 10 days? Metz held against the French in 1870, against us in 1918. We fortified it for decades, and it falls in 10 days. Jodl keeps his voice steady. Third Army, my Führer, General Patton's command. Hitler stands and moves to the map of the Western Front, tracing the Moselle River with his finger, stopping at Metz, then moving east toward the Saar. This is Patton. Of course it's Patton. Where is he now? Jottle points. Third Army is advancing east. Latest intelligence suggests he's positioning for a crossing attempt. Hitler turns to face him. Stop him. Pull units from 15th Army if necessary. Pull them from the Ardennes. Reserves if you must. Whatever it costs, stop Third Army. The fall of Metz triggers an immediate reorganization of German defenses in the West. Units are redeployed. Ammunition stockpiles shifted. Defensive lines realigned. It becomes clear to German High Command that the primary threat is no longer Montgomery's 21st Army Group in the north, nor Hodges with 1st Army in the center. It is Patton's Third Army, the force that just did the impossible and might do it again. By the end of November, Eisenhower faces a decision that will define the winter campaign. Does he rein in Patton before Third Army overextends itself? Or does he let Patton keep going and see what else might be possible when you stop listening to the experts? December 1st, 1944, SHAF Forward Headquarters. Eisenhower receives a detailed analysis from his operations staff. The report breaks down exactly how Patton captured Metz, and the more Eisenhower reads, the more unsettled he becomes. Not because Patton failed, but because he succeeded by violating everything Eisenhower thought he understood about siege warfare. Standard siege doctrine, established by the French military engineer Vauban in the 1700s, refined through centuries of conflict and proven again in World War I, is clear and methodical. Isolate the fortress. Cut supply lines. Position artillery for sustained bombardment. Assault one strong point at a time. Consolidate gains. Repeat. The timeline is measured in months. The process is acceptable, predictable, safe. Patton's method, according to the after-action report, was the opposite. Assault all 28 forts simultaneously or in rapid sequence. Never allow defenders time to reinforce weak points. Use speed and relentless aggression to create psychological collapse before physical collapse. Accept higher risk in exchange for exponentially faster results. The timeline was days, unacceptable by doctrine, unpredictable in outcome, and decidedly not safe. But it worked. Eisenhower reads the individual unit reports. The 5th Infantry Division after action report describes a direct assault on Fort Grissom on November 8. Despite intelligence assessments labeling it impregnable, outer defenses were bypassed using smoke and covering fire. Inner works were penetrated within 72 hours using flamethrowers and close assault tactics. Standard doctrine would have called for weeks of artillery bombardment before such an attempt. The XX Corps commander, Major General Walton Walker, summarizes it bluntly. General Patton's order was clear. I don't want Metz contained. I want it captured now. The attacks were launched in weather conditions that British High Command had declared made offensive operations impossible. The 95th Infantry Division commander, Major General Harry Twaddle, adds his personal observation. We were given 48 hours to break through positions the Germans spent 40 years fortifying. It shouldn't have worked, but Third Army doesn't operate on should. Eisenhower sets the reports down and looks at Smith. George ignored every principle of siege warfare and succeeded anyway. Smith nods. Yes, sir, which raises an uncomfortable question. Are the principles wrong? Or is Patton simply that far outside normal parameters? That question is what keeps Eisenhower awake at night. If the principles are wrong, then everything has to be reconsidered. But if Patton is an anomaly, then his methods can be replicated, can be taught, and can be relied upon. Meanwhile, messages continue to arrive from other theaters and other commanders. A private memo from Montgomery to Churchill, later obtained through intelligence channels, states that Patton's capture of Metz, while admittedly impressive, represents a dangerous deviation from sound military practice, and that success does not validate recklessness. A letter from Bradley to Patton's immediate superior at 12th Army Group strikes a similar tone, George took a calculated risk that happened to work. I'm glad it did, because if it hadn't, I'd be the one explaining why we lost a corps at Metz. Eisenhower writes his own assessment in a letter to General George Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff, dated November 27th. Patton has once again achieved what experts deemed impossible. This creates both opportunity and complications. Other commanders now question why their objectives require months when Patton's require days. I cannot fully explain this. Patton operates on principles I'm not sure even he can articulate: aggression, momentum, and a fundamental refusal to accept limitations. I don't know how to bottle that. I don't know how to teach it. I only know that when I need the impossible done, there is one man I call. By November 22nd, Third Army hadn't just captured the fortress city. It had achieved far more. All 28 forts were captured or neutralized, every single one secured. Bridgeheads across the Moselle, critical for future operations, were firmly in American hands. Third Army advanced 50 miles beyond Metz toward the Saar, already positioning for the next offensive. 6,000 German troops were removed from the battlefield, and more than 100 artillery pieces were destroyed or captured. German defensive capacity in the sector was shattered. All of it accomplished between November 8th and 22nd, in mud, rain, and cold that should have halted offensive operations entirely. Patton writes in his diary on November 22nd. The entry is brief. Metz was supposed to be impregnable. So was every other fortress in history until someone took it. The difference between a fortress and a tomb is usually just a question of will. When Eisenhower later reads that entry through intelligence channels, he understands something fundamental about Patton. The man doesn't just fight the enemy. He fights assumptions. He fights conventional wisdom. He fights the very word impossible. December 2nd, 1944. Eisenhower decides he needs to see Patton face to face, not over the telephone, not through messages. He needs to look him in the eye and understand how. He travels to 3rd Army headquarters in Nancy, France. It has been 10 days since Metz fell, and 3rd Army is already pushing toward the Siegfried Line. Patton is in his office when Eisenhower arrives. Maps cover every wall. Pins and markers show unit positions. Red symbols mark objectives. Patton rises as Eisenhower enters, and they shake hands. "Ike, good to see you." Eisenhower gestures to a chair, and they sit. He pulls out a folder and opens it. "George, I've read every after-action report from Metz. I've reviewed the casualty figures, the timeline, the tactical decisions. I've also read the British intelligence assessment that said this was impossible." Patton leans back. British intelligence also said the Africa Corps couldn't be beaten in open desert. I seem to recall proving them wrong about that too. Eisenhower taps the folder. "You assaulted fortified positions that should have required weeks of artillery preparation. You attacked and weathered that grounded air support. You spread your corps across multiple simultaneous objectives when doctrine says to concentrate force on single points." Patton meets Eisenhower's eyes. "Yes, sir. And it worked." Eisenhower starts to respond, but Patton cuts him off, respectful but firm. "With respect, Ike." That's exactly the point. Doctrine is a guide, not a cage. If I'd followed doctrine, we'd still be outside Metz in March, with 50,000 casualties and a winter campaign already lost because I was too timid to take a calculated risk in November. Eisenhower stands and walks to the map on the wall, tracing the line from Metz to the Saar River. "The Siegfried Line is next for you, isn't it?" Patton stands as well. "Yes, sir. I'm positioning XX Corps now." Eisenhower turns to face him. "And I suppose British intelligence has another assessment telling me that's impossible too." Patton allows himself a slight smile. "Probably. Would you like me to wait for it? Or should I just go ahead and prove them wrong again?" Eisenhower is quiet for a long moment. Then something shifts in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "George, one of these days you're going to attempt something that actually is impossible, and I'll have to explain to Marshall and the President why I let you." Patton's voice remains steady, confident. "When that day comes, I'll hand you my stars personally." Eisenhower starts toward the door, then stops. He turns back. This is the moment he came here for, the acknowledgement that has to be spoken aloud. You actually did it, George. Metz in 10 days. I didn't think it was possible. Neither did anyone else. Churchill didn't think it was possible. Montgomery didn't think it was possible. British intelligence wrote a 47-page report explaining why it wasn't possible. But you actually did it. Patton nods slowly. You want to know the secret, Ike? Everyone keeps telling me what's impossible. I just don't believe them. Eisenhower holds his gaze. Keep not believing them. But George, don't make me regret giving you Third Army. Patton snaps to attention. Too late for that, sir. You gave the army to the right man. History will prove it. That exchange represents something deeper than two generals discussing a battle. It's a fundamental tension in military leadership. The balance between calculated risk and recklessness, between innovation and doctrine, between what experts say is possible and what a determined commander can actually achieve. Eisenhower's words, "You actually did it," aren't just congratulations. They're an admission that Patton shattered every assumption SHAF and Allied High Command held about what was achievable in the winter of 1944. Every projection, every timeline, every calculation. Patton proved them all wrong. And his response, "I just don't believe them," encapsulates his entire command philosophy. It wasn't recklessness. It wasn't ego. It was a refusal to accept expert limitations as absolute truth. He questioned assumptions, tested them against reality, and when they proved false, he acted. Metz was supposed to be a fortress that couldn't fall without months of siege, ancient defenses, modern fortifications, German determination, all the ingredients of an impossible objective. It fell in 10 days, not because of superior weapons, not because of overwhelming numbers, but because one general refused to believe it was impossible. The fall of Metz sent shockwaves through both Allied and German commands, and the strategic effects cascaded through the remainder of the war. The immediate military impact was unmistakable. Third Army advanced 40 miles in the 3 weeks after Metz fell. By December 19th, when the Battle of the Bulge erupted, Patton had positioned Third Army within striking distance of the Siegfried Line. His rapid capture of Metz freed forces that proved critical when he had to pivot north to relieve Bastogne, a maneuver he executed in 48 hours. Another impossible task that Patton made look routine. The contrast in numbers is stark. British estimate, 180 days, 50,000 casualties, 8 divisions required. Actual result, 14 days, November 8th through 22nd, 2,897 casualties, 2 divisions, the 5th and 95th Infantry, 13 times faster than predicted, 94% fewer casualties, 75% fewer forces required. Those aren't margins of error. Those are fundamental miscalculations about what was possible. The fall of Metz forced a complete review of Allied intelligence assessments of fortified positions. A classified memo from the British Joint Intelligence Committee dated December 1944 admitted as much. Previous fortress assessments assumed conventional siege doctrine, systematic reduction of strong points over extended periods. American Third Army under General Patton does not employ conventional doctrine, simultaneous assault, sustained pressure, psychological warfare through operational tempo. Future estimates must account for variable command philosophy. In plain terms, they couldn't predict Patton because he didn't follow the rules used to make predictions. The German response was equally revealing. After Metz, Hitler became personally obsessed with stopping Patton. Wehrmacht intelligence designated Third Army as the primary threat to the Reich's western defense, not Montgomery's 21st Army Group, not Hodges with 1st Army. The December counteroffensive, the Battle of Bulge, was partially designed to disrupt Third Army's advance, to throw Patton off balance and break his momentum. But Patton's rapid response, pivoting an entire army 90 degrees in the middle of winter to relieve Bastogne in 48 hours, proved that even Hitler couldn't stop him, couldn't predict him, couldn't contain him. Patton's capture of Metz was more than a tactical victory. It was a philosophical challenge to military orthodoxy. Eisenhower, the supreme diplomat and coalition commander, operated on careful calculation, consensus, tested doctrine, predictability. Patton operated on instinct, aggression, and a belief that expert consensus could be wrong. Their exchange in December 1944, "You actually did it," met with "I just don't believe them," captures eternal tension between caution and audacity in command, between playing it safe and testing limits. Years later, in 1967, Eisenhower reflected on Patton in an interview. His words were telling. George was infuriating, insubordinate, and convinced he was always right. The problem was, he usually was. Metz was supposed to be impossible. He made it look routine. That's what made him so valuable and so dangerous. You couldn't predict what he'd do next, but you could count on it being something everyone else said couldn't be done. That was Eisenhower's final assessment of Patton, valuable and dangerous. Two words that perfectly capture the paradox of his command. The fortress city of Metz, unconquered since 52 BC when Julius Caesar's legions took it after a 6-month siege, held against medieval armies for centuries, withstood Renaissance cannon, and resisted World War I assaults. The French couldn't take it quickly. The British studied it and declared it impregnable without a sustained siege. The Germans reinforced it with 28 concrete forts, underground, tunnels, interlocking fields of fire, and a garrison they believed would hold for a minimum of 6 months. The Germans were convinced Metz would anchor their winter defense, buy time to reinforce the Siegfried Line, and delay the Allied advance until spring. George S. Patton took it in 10 days, not because he had better intelligence, though his G2 section was excellent, not because he had more soldiers, though XX Corps was well-trained and well-equipped, not because he had superior weapons, though American artillery and armor were formidable. He took it in 10 days because when British experts said it would take 6 months, he didn't believe them. When doctrine said to establish siege lines and proceed methodically, he ignored it. When the weather said offensive operations should stop, he attacked anyway. When conventional wisdom insisted fortresses required time, he proved that fortresses require will. And that's what this story means for understanding military history, for understanding leadership, for understanding how impossible things become possible. Experts make predictions based on data, precedent, and doctrine. Those predictions are usually accurate because most commanders follow the same playbooks, use the same tactics, and accept the same limitations. But occasionally, someone comes along who refuses to accept those limits, who questions precedent, who rewrites doctrine instead of obeying it. And when that person succeeds, every assumption has to be reconsidered. Patton didn't just capture Metz. He proved that expert consensus isn't always correct, that impossible is sometimes just untested, that the difference between a fortress and a tomb really is a question of will. Eisenhower understood this. That's why he kept Patton in command despite the headaches, despite the controversies, despite the political complications. Because when you need the impossible done, you don't call the person who follows doctrine. You call the person who rewrites it. 10 days. Metz fell in 10 days. And the shockwaves from that victory rippled through the rest of the war, shaping the Allied advance, forcing German redeployments, and changing the strategic calculus for everyone involved. All because one general looked at the word impossible and decided not to believe it. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of history enthusiast we create content for here at World War Lab. Stories like this, the ones that challenge everything we thought we knew about the war, are what we're all about. Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, drop a comment below, and tell us which impossible moment from World War II you want us to cover next. We read every single comment. And remember, history isn't just about what happened. It's about understanding why everyone thought it couldn't happen, and how someone proved them wrong. Anyway, thanks for watching World War Lab.